This is a second video in a two-part series about plagiarism and avoiding plagiarism by using sources properly. If you did not watch the first video, you need to stop this one right now and go back to the first one. So here's a look at academic dishonesty. On the screen you will be able to read a scenario, and we'll talk a little bit about why this is academic dishonesty. The first scenario is that it's time to write your first paper for your English class. You are pressed for time and decide to use the same paper you wrote for your ethnic studies class earlier in the semester. Is this okay? The answer is no, it is not okay. This is considered academic dishonesty. While yes, you did write the paper, you cannot turn that paper in to any class you wish. You're expected to write your paper for each class as it is presented. If you don't do this, then first of all, you're not learning what you need to learn by writing the paper, and you're also being dishonest towards your instructor by they presume that you have written it for their class. The next scenario is your big research paper is due today. Class is about to begin and you overhear two of your classmates bragging about how their paper took no time at all because they used a paper from a free internet site. What would you do? Well, hopefully you would not go to this same internet site and download your own paper. This is the most direct and most obvious form of plagiarism. This is the easiest for your instructor to catch and the most likely to get you a 0 in the class or failed from the class. So it's very important that you do not go and look for free papers on the internet. Next scenario is that Sue needs to write a paper on a topic of her choice, but she needs to have at least 3 scholarly sources to back up her claims. She has just spent a substantial amount of time writing the paper and is having a hard time finding sources that support her assertions. What would you suggest? Well, Sue's problem right now is that she's done it backwards. She needed to find her sources first and then write her paper. Now she's probably going to have to rewrite her entire paper because without those sources, her paper is not complete. The last scenario is that you're working 2 jobs and have a full class load. You have a huge research paper due tomorrow and are just now starting to work on it. A friend of yours says that she took the class last semester and hung on to the paper. She offers to let you use it. What are the potential consequences? Well, the consequence for you is that you will get an F on the paper, a 0 on the paper. You possibly will fail the class. For your friend, though, a lot of students don't realize that an instructor can go back and retroactively fail a student for helping another student to cheat. Now, this is something important to remember. If you have a friend who asks to borrow a paper, make sure that you don't give them the entire final draft, or that you just let them view the paper without giving them a copy to keep. We have had scenarios like this, and unfortunately students have gotten into a lot of trouble because we don't know whether they do it on purpose or not. So you should never borrow a paper from someone else, and you should never allow someone else to borrow your paper. These are the 5 types of plagiarism that we'll be discussing. The first type of plagiarism is direct plagiarism, and this is the most obvious for students to catch themselves doing. This is the copy and paste type, and the most obvious for an instructor to catch a student doing. Borrowing from others involves, just like it says, borrowing from a friend, having someone else write a paper for you, taking a paper off the internet, and that sort of thing. Vague and incorrect citations. Technically, if you do not do the documentation correctly, it is considered plagiarism. In particular, not putting quotation marks around direct quotes, things like that. That falls under the category of plagiarism. Number 4 is auto-plagiarism, and this is reusing a paper that you have written. And number 5 is mosaic plagiarism. This is the hardest to catch yourself doing and one of the harder ones to detect. And so we're going to spend some time talking about that. So here are a couple of examples of what plagiarism looks like. This is the original source, and this is what the student has written. If you want to, you can now pause the screen and correct what the student has written. If you notice, the problem here is that the student has direct words, word for word from the original, without the quotation marks. Here is a version that corrects the problem. It is very simple to do. All you need to do is to come up with a little bit of a better introduction and then add those quotation marks around the words that are word for word from the original. Here's the next example. the original, and then this is the student's work. You should now pause the screen and see if you can figure out why this is considered plagiarism and how it should be fixed. Here are the problems. This is why this is considered plagiarism. As you can see on the screen here, the underlined portions are pretty much word for word from the original, and the words in red are synonyms of words from the original. So what the student did was kind of paraphrase and kind of quote. And so since it's a mixture of the two, it is considered an inaccurate paraphrase and it borders on plagiarism. So a better solution would be to write something like this. You can pause the screen now and compare the difference between the problematic paragraph and the acceptable one. If you note, the acceptable paragraph has a different way of explaining the information than the original. It doesn't follow in the same order as the original, it doesn't discuss things in the same manner as the original, but it is about the same topic. And that's the key part of paraphrasing, is you need to keep the same information, but you want to rewrite it completely in your own words. And your paraphrase should make better sense than the original. It should be written in a simpler manner, and it should be a little bit cleaner because your writing will probably be a little bit more simple than the author's writing. And so you want to match that with your writing style so it fits better in your essay. Here are a couple of tips to avoid unintentional plagiarism. You might read the passage several times, then set it aside and type up the content from memory. This is the technique I use. I'll spend some time really studying a passage and making sure that I understand it, then I'll set it aside and I will type it up from memory. So I don't accidentally use some of the words and phrases from the original. You might paraphrase a passage in your notes and then paraphrase your paraphrase. This way it is paraphrased twice and you are twice removed from the original and you're much less likely to be copying words, phrases, and sentence structure. You should also cite as you write. Don't add in sources after the paper is written. I have students who do this all the time. They write their entire paper and then they go back in and try and figure out when they used a source. And this is not the correct way to do it. You should always cite as you write. If you have trouble doing this, I recommend numbering your sources. And as you type a sentence, if you use something from that source, just stick that number at the end of the sentence. Then when you're completely done, you can go back in and change those numbers to proper citations and add in things like direct quotations and more specific examples. If you're ever in doubt, give a citation for a sentence. That way you can avoid accidentally plagiarizing. It's always better to overcite something than to undercite it. Also make sure you take effective notes over your sources so you can remember what came from which source and you don't accidentally mix them up. This slide show has been about avoiding plagiarism and connects with paraphrasing, quoting, and summarizing. In order to avoid plagiarism, the best way is to learn how to accurately paraphrase and directly quote work from your sources.